Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're going to talk about something you probably didn't expect. A Roman senator declaring war on the sea. Yes, you heard that right. On the actual ocean. Or more specifically, the Roman god of the sea, Neptune. Imagine this. You're standing on a rocky cliff along the Italian coast. The waves below crash and roar, indifferent to the tiny human staring them down. That human, in a heavy toga that keeps catching the wind, is red-faced and absolutely livid. He shakes a fist at the horizon. A scroll of legal grievances flaps in his other hand. Somewhere behind him, a goat bleats nervously. You're not sure yet, but you have a feeling that Goat's Day is about to get worse. You might be surprised to hear this story, but yes, it really happened. Or at least, something very close to it did. Rome, in all its seriousness and splendor, once allowed one of its senators to declare war on a god because his ship sank in a storm. So, before you get cozy and drift off to sleep, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to support us. Now, turn off the lights, close your eyes, relax your body, focus on the story, and enjoy the ride tonight. You're walking along the Roman docks, sandals slapping gently on weathered stones. The Mediterranean sparkles, deceptively calm this morning. But last week, it was chaos. Waves taller than columns tore through a Roman fleet returning from a rather routine patrol. 10 ships, gone. Not just gone, eaten by the sea, swallowed whole. You were there when the news reached Senator Gaius Cassius Figulus. Tall, balding, always with a suspicious smell of pickled olives about him. He stood silent at first, then began twitching slightly at the eye. The kind of twitch that whispers, "I'm about to do something extremely Roman and unnecessarily dramatic." By the time he reached the forum, Gaius wasn't just upset. He was incandescent with righteous fury. Not at the sailors for poor seamanship, not at fate. No. Gaius blamed Neptune himself, the ancient, trident-wielding god of the sea, whose statue stood on every respectable harbor's altar. You're in the forum now. The stone amphitheater is packed. Spectators fan themselves with wax tablets. Children munch on honeyed almonds. And in the middle of it all, Gaius stands atop the rostra, cloak flapping in the breeze, cheeks puffed from yelling. "They were innocent men," he shouts, gesturing wildly. "They had cargo. One of them had my favorite bronze soup ladle. And what did Neptune do? Smote them. As if Neptune had risen from the surf like some overcooked fish monster and personally smacked each ship into kindling. The senators murmur among themselves. Some stifle laughs. One very old man with bushy eyebrows nods solemnly. Yes, smoting is a serious offense. And just like that, the mood shifts. Gaius, despite sounding completely unhinged, taps into something deeply Roman. The need for order, for cause, for someone, even a deity, to be held accountable. So, he proposes it. A formal declaratio belli, a declaration of war against Neptune. Now, you're probably wondering, what does it even mean to declare war on a god? Oh, buckle up. A scribe records the motion. A priest looks extremely uncomfortable. A small dog sneezes nearby, perhaps sensing divine retribution in the air. You can't help but admire the sheer audacity of it all. Rome, after all, was full of gods. Household gods, field gods, goddesses for doors, thresholds, and even mildew, and they all had their quirks. But to punish one, that was spicy. As Gaius finishes his tirade, complete with dramatic sobbing over his lost soup ladle, the Senate begins to murmur louder. The younger senators are amused. The older ones, less so. They remember storms, too. Storms that took sons, lovers, slaves with gambling debts they still hadn't collected on. And suddenly, this isn't about ships. It's about justice. Or, let's be honest, it's about revenge. The very Roman kind. Here's your first authoritative historical fact. Rome truly did have rituals for declaring war, not just against nations, but sometimes against abstract forces. Priests called fedials would perform formal invocations and throw spears into enemy lands. That's not the strange part. The strange part is, if there wasn't an enemy land available, they'd designate a little square of dirt outside the city, call it foreign, and throw the spear there. So, yes, declaring war on Neptune wasn't just absurd. It was technically feasible. All you needed was paperwork, incense, and an alarming amount of optimism. And the people, well, they loved it. Bread, circuses, and now, divine lawsuits. It was a welcome distraction from taxes, droughts, and the fact that their favorite gladiator kept losing. That night, as you walk home from the forum, you overhear two vendors whispering over wine. Did you hear? Gaius is building a war altar. Against the sea? Yup, says it'll be mobile. Like, on wheels? They sip quietly. One shrugs. Romans, man. Historians are still debating whether this whole affair was meant to be satire, an earnest ritual, or some deranged political stunt. But you were there. You saw the fury in Gaius's eyes, the sincerity, the single-minded obsession of a man who'd lost something. Something more than ships. Maybe pride. Maybe the last sliver of sanity. You settle into your cot that night, the breeze from your window smelling faintly of salt. And just before you drift off, you imagine Neptune himself, reclining somewhere in his underwater palace, utterly oblivious. Maybe he's sipping sea foam, watching dolphin races. Or maybe, just maybe, he's smirking because you know what's coming next. The next morning, you're back in the forum, because of course you are. You wouldn't miss this. Gaius Cassius Figulus is at it again. Only this time, he's not just shouting into the wind. Today, he's presenting a formal motion in front of the full Roman Senate. You find yourself a spot near the marble steps, trying to blend in as the murmuring grows louder. The pigeons, by the way, seem unusually tense today, probably because they've been recruited for ritual purposes, and none of them filled out the proper consent forms. Gaius steps forward, draped in the ceremonial white toga with a crimson stripe that declares, "I am very official." He clears his throat. Somewhere a trumpet sounds, but it's cut off mid-blare as the player realizes this is not a military parade. It's something weirder. The Republic, Gaius begins solemnly, has been wronged. Gravely, maliciously, saltily. A few titters ripple through the Senate, but Gaius raises a hand, and astonishingly, silence falls. 10 ships, 238 men, 3 cats, lost to the sea. And to whom do we owe this grievous affront? He slams a scroll on the podium. Neptune. Oh, he names him. First rule of supernatural warfare: call out your opponent. He has acted without declaration, without honor. He has struck first, like a Carthaginian with kelp between his teeth. It is the duty of this Senate to respond, to rise, to hold this aquatic tyrant accountable. A senator near you leans over and whispers, "Is he comparing Neptune to Hannibal?" Shh, this is the good part. Gaius paces now, warming up. I propose we invoke the full rights of bellum justum, a just war. We shall send our priests to cast the first spear. We shall consult the Sibylline oracles, and we shall rally the people. This is not madness. It is justice. Somewhere near the back, an assistant drops a writing tablet in surprise. You stifle a giggle. Then comes the part that really drives the point home. Gaius brings out a visual aid. Yes, a model of a Roman trireme, hand-carved, lovingly painted, floating in a shallow bowl of water. And this, he intones gravely, represents what Neptune did. With flair, he plunges his hand into the bowl and smashes the model. Water sloshes onto a nearby senator's toga. There's a pause. Then, polite applause. Because here's the thing. Romans adored drama, especially if it came with props. The performance might seem unhinged, but remember, this is the same civilization that created gladiatorial combat and named entire months after emperors. A man declaring war on Neptune? Honestly, it's on brand. One senator stands. He's old, stooped, and vaguely smells like ancient scroll glue. I second the motion. You blink. It's happening. This is actually happening. What follows is pure procedural theater. The Fetiales, Rome's special class of priest diplomats who usually handle declarations of war, are summoned. They're less than thrilled. One of them keeps muttering, but he's not a sovereign state. He's a god. But the motion is now under formal review. Debate begins. And like any good Roman debate, it quickly derails. Senator Drusus from Gaul stands and argues that perhaps the storm was actually caused by an imbalance in the ether. Senator Verinia suggests maybe the fleet was cursed because they failed to sacrifice a pie. No, not a pig, a pie. She gets very defensive when corrected. A third senator, clearly having fun with this, proposes a counter-declaration against Vulcan, god of fire, for that one time my kitchen exploded. This receives actual chuckles. Still, by sundown, a decision is reached. Rome, glorious, bureaucratic Rome, will proceed with a formal declaration of war against the god Neptune. You watch as the scribes record the edict in flowing ink, and Gaius stands proud. His chin is high, his sandals are wet, his ego positively floating. The next morning, preparations begin. The priests organize a date for the ritual spear throwing. The augurs begin reading omens. And the pigeons? Well, they've mysteriously vanished, probably unionized. And here's a strange but true detail. In some Roman religious rites, live animals were consulted to interpret divine will. If a chicken refused to eat grain, for example, it meant bad luck. So naturally, Gaius has now ordered an entire ark of animals to be assembled for omens. You walk past the holding pens that evening. A goat, 2 chickens, a confused-looking tortoise, all waiting to help determine the fate of an interdimensional war. Historians are still debating whether the Senate truly believed any of this would amount to a real war. Some argue it was symbolic, a kind of divine scolding. Others suggest Gaius may have been using the spectacle to distract from recent allegations of embezzling temple funds. You know, the usual. Still, there's something poetic about the way Rome reacts to tragedy. Not with tears, not with mourning, but with ritual, with rage, and with a public ceremony involving birds, togas, and possibly magic. As the sun dips below the horizon, you find yourself walking once more along the coast. The sea is calm again, mocking, almost. The waves whisper along the rocks as if they know what's coming. Gaius, somewhere inland, is rehearsing a new speech. One that ends, reportedly, with him shaking a sword at the sky and shouting, "Come at me, bro!" He may have misinterpreted how sea gods operate. You sit on the edge of the stone jetty, feet dangling above the surf, and wonder, what happens if Neptune answers? And what if he doesn't? You wake up to the smell of incense and pigeon droppings. That's right, the day has arrived. Today is the official ceremony to declare war on Neptune. The Fetiales, those long-suffering ritual priests, have set up outside the city walls, near a makeshift altar someone cobbled together from driftwood and overly ambitious civic pride. You join the growing crowd of onlookers, all dressed in their sturdiest sandals and most wrinkle-resistant tunics. There's a noticeable buzz in the air. After all, it's not every day you watch your government go to war against a god. You squint toward the altar. Yep, there's Gaius. He's holding a staff in one hand and a scroll in the other. His toga is pristine, likely dry cleaned at the Temple of Clean Linen, and he's flanked by two very serious-looking young men carrying ceremonial jugs. No one is entirely sure what's in the jugs. Theories include olive oil, wine, or possibly seawater with Neptune's vibe infused. The Fetiales begin the ancient rite. You edge closer, stepping over a discarded laurel wreath and a half-eaten date cake. A crier recites the traditional phrases, invoking the gods, the heavens, and a frankly exhausting number of ancestors. Then comes the big moment. A specially designated priest steps forward with the ceremonial spear. It's not really a spear. It's more like a carved stick with bronze bands, meant to represent the weapon of war. He raises it over his head. The crowd hushes. Even the pigeons seem respectfully mute, and with full solemnity, the priest hurls the spear into a bucket of salt water. That's it. That's the act. Rome has now declared war on the god of the sea by stabbing a glorified mop into brine. You hear someone whisper behind you, "Well, that'll show him." You'd think it would stop there, but no. Gaius has more planned. After the spear is thrown, he steps forward to read his formal complaint against Neptune. The document, by the way, is 8 feet long and partially singed at the corners, perhaps from a failed attempt to make it look divinely distressed. "I, Gaius Cassius Figulus," he booms, "do hereby accuse Neptune, god of the seas, horses, and earthquakes, of willful aggression against the Roman Republic. Let it be known that he acted without just cause, against unarmed vessels, and is thus guilty of divine misconduct. We demand compensation. 10 ships, 238 men, and 3 cats." You stifle a snort. He continues, Until such reparations are rendered, the Republic considers itself in a state of war with Neptune and his aquatic dominion. Now that the war is official, the priests begin the next phase, divine communication, which is where things get even weirder. See, Romans believed they could send messages to gods through ritual, sometimes with incense, sometimes with birds, sometimes with pantomime. Yes, they mimed messages to gods. You now witness a full interpretive dance where two junior priests pretend to row a boat, encounter a storm, and shake their fists angrily at the sky. One of them slips and falls, which frankly adds to the realism. Then, a final ritual, the summoning of Neptune. No one expects him to show up, of course, but the protocol demands it. A priest calls his name over and over while shaking a conch shell and sprinkling crushed oyster shells on the ground. It's less divine judgment and more seafood festival. But here's your historical fact of the day. Roman rituals, especially those involving gods, had layers of legal importance. They weren't just for show. They were seen as binding contracts. By going through the proper steps, the Senate was, in theory, forcing Neptune to respond. Of course, being a god, he didn't exactly have an address, a strange detail you can't unsee. The tortoise brought for omens has been painted blue and given a tiny helmet. You make a mental note to investigate this later. As the crowd disperses, people begin discussing next steps. War has been declared. But what now? Gaius insists on preparing defenses against waves, against aquatic infiltration. He proposes building anti-Neptune fortifications along the coast and possibly a god net. You're not sure what a god net is, but you assume it involves rope and poor judgment. The logistics are already spiraling. Grain supplies for a potential coastal siege. Engineers debating whether underwater ballistas are feasible. A military surveyor suggests damming the Tiber just to show Neptune who's boss. One senator proposes capturing dolphins and using them as spies. They're close to Neptune, he reasons. We can interrogate them. Using what? Another asks. Shellfish and guilt? And that, of course, starts an argument about dolphin morality, which devolves into someone shouting, "My cousin was bitten by one," and storming off. Historians are still debating whether this whole process was intended to be taken seriously. Some claim it was an elaborate metaphor, a satire of Roman bureaucracy and superstition. Others argue that Gaius genuinely believed he could cow the gods into submission through ritualized bravado. But as you watch him that evening, standing on a bluff overlooking the sea, wind tugging at his toga, muttering "coward" toward the waves, you're inclined to believe it wasn't satire. He's serious, dead serious, and maybe that's what makes it so Roman. The combination of high-minded ritual, absurd spectacle, and relentless pride. You stroll home as twilight falls, your sandals gritty with sand. The city buzzes behind you, already telling tales of the war with the sea. Children splash in fountains, reenacting naval battles. Vendors sell Neptune repellent, made of garlic and goat hair. You smile because you know it's only going to get weirder from here. You wake up the next morning to the unmistakable sound of something clanking and someone yelling. That's not how nets work, which, given the state of Roman military planning right now, feels right on schedule. Word has spread across the city like spilled wine on a senator's tunic. The war on Neptune has officially begun, and now comes the most Roman of responses: logistics. You head to the Campus Martius, Rome's wide military training field, where soldiers are already drilling. But these aren't your average maneuvers. You squint across the field. One group is practicing with oars on dry land. They're miming rowing in tight formation, even though there's no water within sight. A centurion barks commands: stroke, stroke, splash emotionally. Nearby, engineers are experimenting with water-resistant scrolls. You pass a craftsman proudly showing off a trident-catching net, which, upon closer inspection, is just a repurposed fishing net with bronze bells tied to it. He explains, it jingles when gods are near. You nod, impressed. Not by the logic, by the sheer confidence. And then there's the God Tower. Gaius has commissioned a tall wooden watchtower by the sea, allegedly to spot Neptune if he ever surfaces. You climb to the top out of curiosity. The view is breathtaking, the ocean vast and indifferent. But you also notice it wobbles suspiciously when you breathe too hard. It is, in a word, doomed. At the planning tent, yes, they have a tent now. You sit in on the latest military strategy session. A wax tablet serves as the map. A handful of black olives represent the Roman fleet. A puddle of spilled wine? That's Neptune. Gaius stands in front of the table, eyes wild, hair now windswept in a way that says, heroic or unhinged. He outlines his new strategy. 1. Naval drills every morning at sunrise for morale. 2. Throwing spears into the ocean hourly for intimidation. 3. Banning all fish from Roman dinners for psychological warfare. You raise an eyebrow at that last one. Someone else asks, even tuna? Yes, especially tuna, Gaius growls. Back in the city, shopkeepers are capitalizing on the excitement. Trinkets shaped like lightning bolts labeled Zeus Insurance are sold beside jars of Neptune-proof salt. One tavern offers a drink called the Stormbringer. It's blue, spicy, and comes in a seashell. You try one. It tastes like regret and seaweed, but amid the silliness, you catch wind of something stranger. A group of citizens gathering at the docks, throwing curses at the sea. A woman hurls a sandal into the surf and screams, "That's for my cousin's ferry delay." A teenager throws a handful of grain and shouts, "You owe me a birthday party, Neptune." Here's your authoritative fact of the day. In ancient Rome, when disasters struck, public blame often fell, not just on politicians or bad luck, but on the divine. It was common to perform appeasement rituals, sacrifices, or even temporary bans on worshiping a god who'd misbehaved. It's called evocatio, the process of inviting a foreign god to abandon their old city and join Rome instead. But sometimes it went the other way. Romans would exile a god symbolically until they behaved better. And Neptune? Oh, he's very much in time out. Back at the Forum, Gaius presents his newest proposal: building a seawall of vengeance. It's not exactly clear what this wall will do. Contain the ocean? Shame it? One senator asks, "Won't it just fall over when wet?" Another replies, "Like my marriage." They both nod solemnly. Historians are still debating whether these construction efforts were intended as metaphors, physical expressions of resistance, or simply busy work to distract a deeply nervous populace. What's undeniable is how seriously the Romans took these symbolic gestures. One very strange detail today: a mime has been hired to reenact the Battle of the Storm. You watch him flail dramatically, pretend to drown, and then be revived by a passing goat. The crowd applauds. The goat, now unofficially a war hero, is fed grapes and offered a laurel wreath. It eats the wreath. As the sun sets, you follow Gaius down to the harbor for the first naval response exercise. 3 boats are launched. 2 real, 1 suspiciously floaty wooden decoy painted with eyes. Gaius stands at the prow of the lead vessel, arms outstretched. "This," he shouts, "is how we answer tyranny." A priest rings a tiny bell. Drummers beat a rhythm. And then, a coordinated gesture. Dozens of soldiers throw their javelins into the waves. The waves, unsurprisingly, remain unmoved. There's a long pause. Then one soldier, quietly, "Did we win?" Another, "Hard to say." The ocean doesn't really have reaction shots, but Gaius isn't discouraged. Not at all. He kneels at the edge of the ship, dips his hand in the water, and whispers, "You'll answer me yet." You're not sure if he's talking to Neptune or just monologuing for dramatic effect, but either way, it's gripping. That night, Rome is restless. The wind howls gently through alleyways. You pass a group of children playing senators versus sea gods with sticks and buckets. One of them, pretending to be Neptune, is dramatically pelted with figs. You lie down, the air tinged with salt and incense, and consider the strangeness of it all. A civilization so proud, so steeped in order and ritual, declaring war on a force they cannot even touch. But that's Rome for you, and you have a feeling, deep in your sleepy bones, that this story is just beginning. You're starting to think Rome might actually be winning. Not the war, obviously, not against the literal ocean, but the performance of the war. It's been a week since the declaration, and the city has gone full drama mode. Today, for instance, a team of senators in matching ceremonial sandals has gathered on the coast for something Gaius Cassius Figulus is calling Operation Maximum Pettiness. You're there, of course. You're always there. This time, the goal is to strike a blow to Neptune's pride, which sounds intense until you see what it entails. The ceremonial kicking over of a seaside altar. Yes, apparently someone built a temple to Neptune, probably centuries ago, and now Gaius has declared it enemy architecture. You watch as 4 soldiers struggle to topple a marble column that absolutely refuses to budge. One eventually slips and faceplants into a tide pool. Another breaks a sandal strap and throws it into the sea while yelling, "That was new!" Eventually, they succeed in toppling the top part of the altar. The moment is celebrated with a somber flute solo and exactly 4 claps. This is how Rome fights a god. Back in the city, the Senate passes new war measures, mostly symbolic, wildly impractical. Among them, banning public bathing on Neptune's feast days, which makes no one happy, refusing to name any newborns Neptunus, and my personal favorite, throwing 1 spear into the Tiber River every Thursday as a reminder. One senator suggests building a statue of Gaius, heroically resisting the sea. He's promptly promoted to head of morale. Here's your authoritative historical fact. Ancient Rome often used rituals as tools of psychological warfare. Against enemies, yes, but also the population itself. Ceremony gave the illusion of control. If the gods were angry, you could do something. Sacrifices, decrees, grand gestures involving geese. It reassured the masses. Chaos could be managed with enough ritualized bureaucracy. And that brings us to today's strange detail. Gaius has commissioned what he calls a naval offense drill. You'd think this means boats, right? Wrong. This drill takes place entirely on land. You find yourself on the outskirts of Rome, watching soldiers charge full speed into a massive wooden wave sculpture that someone, you suspect an underpaid artist, spent hours painting. The goal? Simulate battle with Neptune's forces. A horn blows. Soldiers run forward. They shout battle cries like, "Down with saltwater tyranny," and "Give me liberty," or "Give me floaties." Spears bounce harmlessly off the wooden waves. You're not sure what the victory condition is, but eventually, someone declares, "We've breached the foam line," and everyone cheers. At this point, even the horses are looking confused. The city, meanwhile, has embraced the absurdity. Children wear tridents made from kitchen spoons. Merchants sell sea god repellent in tiny clay jars. It smells suspiciously like oregano. There's a popular new poem circulating that begins, "O Neptune, you soggy beast, your pride is least, your tides deceased." And through it all, Gaius continues his relentless crusade. He walks the streets with the intensity of a man who's absolutely certain he's on the right side of history, and maybe also hasn't slept in 3 days. You pass him one evening pacing by a public fountain, glaring at it like it owes him money. He's muttering, "Cowardly aquatic brute," and shaking his head at the ripples. One local musician tries to cheer him up with a new tune, Ballad of the Drenched Republic. It features a lyre solo and a chorus of children splashing rhythmically. Gaius doesn't laugh. He just stares at the water. Historians are still debating whether Gaius believed Neptune would retaliate or respond at all. Was he waiting for a lightning bolt? A voice in the surf? A dolphin carrying a scroll? Whatever he expected, it wasn't the dead silence that has followed Rome's declarations. And that silence? It's starting to get to him. One night, you see Gaius standing on the docks alone, watching the moonlit waves. "I've insulted him," he says without turning. "I've cursed his name, toppled his altars, mocked his tides, and still nothing." You want to tell him that maybe Neptune doesn't read scrolls, that maybe the gods operate on their own celestial Google Calendar, and responding to a bureaucratic insult from a land-based mammal isn't exactly top priority. But instead, you just sit with him. The wind is soft. The ocean mumbles to itself, as always, oblivious and eternal. And maybe that's the point. Rome has thrown everything it can. Rituals, laws, architecture, even theater, at a force of nature that cannot be shamed or summoned. Gaius wanted order, revenge, closure. And all he got was the quiet, endless motion of the sea. The next day, a new plan emerges. Operation Echo, Gaius calls it. The goal? Hold a public debate with the sea. You're not making this up. He wants to host it on the beach. A stage will be erected. A panel of senators will pose arguments. An empty chair will be placed for Neptune. A scribe will transcribe the silence as a reply. Rome is losing its mind, and it's glorious. You shake your head, but you're not going anywhere. Because deep down, some part of you respects it. The stubbornness, the theatricality, the need to make meaning from storm and chaos. Rome doesn't retreat. Rome performs, even when the opponent is the tide itself. The sand is warm beneath your feet this morning as you shuffle toward the seaside stage that's been hastily built overnight. A handful of benches face the water, and a great crimson canopy stretches over what must be the most unnecessary piece of theater the Republic has ever produced: the public debate with Neptune. You find a seat between a boy clutching a wooden dolphin and a toga-clad woman fanning herself with what looks like a legislative scroll. Everyone's whispering, half excited, half bewildered. A banner flaps in the breeze above the stage. Lex versus Tide, a dialogue of equals. At center stage sits a row of proud senators in their formal garb, each armed with long parchment scrolls and polished rhetorical arguments. And just across from them, a chair, a very fancy, very empty chair, crowned with seashells, reserved, of course, for the god Neptune. The debate begins with, unsurprisingly, Gaius Cassius Figulus. You recognize that fire in his eyes, the same wild flame that once accused a drizzle of being an assassination attempt. He steps forward and bows slightly to the audience, then to the empty seat. We begin today not with hatred, he announces, but with hope. Hope that the god of the seas will hear our call and offer an explanation for his aggression. He pauses. The wind picks up. A gull squawks overhead. Taking silence as permission, he continues, Neptune, you who command the oceans, we offer you this opportunity to explain the storm that swallowed 10 Roman vessels, to tell us if it was wrath or whim, or mere negligence of divine duty. Nothing. Not a ripple, not a whisper. Gaius turns to the scribe, seated off to the side, and gestures sharply. Record that. Neptune offers no rebuttal. The audience murmurs in approval. A senator from Sicilia stands next and rattles off a list of sea-related grievances from his constituents. Fishing delays, soggy togas, inexplicable sea foam near a sacred statue. All blamed, naturally, on Neptune, and still no response. One senator even accuses the god of emotional manipulation through wave patterns, which, though vague, receives modest applause. But the moment of the day comes from Senator Plinius, a man with wild eyebrows and a voice like gravel being stirred in olive oil. Let us remember, he declares, pacing, that Rome has always tamed nature. We cut roads through mountains. We drained swamps to build temples. And now we are mocked by water? This wet trickster dares to challenge the Republic? He stops dramatically, pointing toward the surf. Let the record show. Neptune is a coward. Gaius nods vigorously. Yes, a coward. A young man in the audience yells, He's all splash, no clash. You chuckle despite yourself. Here's your authoritative historical fact. The Romans believed in noumena, divine presences or forces that inhabited everything, from rivers to door hinges. These weren't always personal gods, like Jupiter or Mars, but rather vague, sacred forces that required acknowledgement, sometimes bargaining, often blame. When things went wrong, earthquakes, floods, military defeats, some Numan somewhere had clearly been offended. And so, this debate with Neptune isn't just theater, it's politics, it's cosmology, it's Rome, standing on its marble pedestal, shaking a legal scroll at the divine chaos of the world and declaring, we will have answers. Today's strange detail. Someone has hired a seaweed vendor. You watch as he peddles dried Neptune effigies woven from kelp, which he assures passers-by will prevent divine recurrence. One child waves his like a banner. The debate continues for hours, each senator more poetic than the last. Someone quotes Virgil. Someone else misquotes him, but adds finger gestures to compensate. Finally, Gaius stands again to deliver his closing remarks. "Let it be known," he bellows, "that we offered dialogue, that Rome showed restraint, dignity, and a chance for reconciliation, and that he gestures grandly to the sea, offered only foam." He slams a wooden gavel onto the podium, even though this is not technically a court. "Therefore, let us escalate. Rome shall not be made a fool of by damp silence." And just like that, the debate is adjourned. Historians are still debating whether Gaius actually believed Neptune would answer. Through a sign, a storm, a talking fish, anything. Or whether the whole affair was really a mirror held up to Rome itself. A way for senators to perform their authority to a nervous public desperate for meaning. The audience trickles away as the sun sets. One woman pats the empty Neptune chair and whispers, "Maybe next time, dear." You linger a little longer. The waves roll in, unbothered as always. You start to wonder if Neptune heard. And if he did, what did he think? Is he amused? Insulted? Did he even notice? You turn to walk away, when suddenly, just as your sandal hits the top step of the wooden platform, a wave crashes louder than usual. A spray of cold, salt water slaps across the stage. Gaius shrieks. Scrolls fly into the air like startled pigeons. The fancy Neptune chair, soaked. Everyone stares at the sea, and the sea says nothing, just one big cold splash. Coincidence? Maybe. But Gaius doesn't think so. You see it in his wide eyes. He points a trembling finger at the water. It has begun. You sigh. Of course, Rome doesn't back down. Even when the enemy is gravity and moonlight in motion. You walk home, salt drying on your skin, ears full of laughter and wild theories. Some say it was a message. Others say it was just the tide. And one merchant swears he saw a trident floating just beneath the waves. You're not sure how it's come to this, but you're currently watching a group of Roman teenagers dressed as horses doing interpretive dance around a bonfire. It's called the Neptunalia Reimagined, and apparently it's Gaius Cassius Figelus's new strategy to shame Neptune through reenactments of his own mythology. Yes, because nothing unsettles a sea god quite like poorly choreographed pantomime and suspiciously flammable costumes. The dance is meant to retell Neptune's origin story, how he was born of Saturn, devoured as an infant, and regurgitated fully grown along with his siblings. Then, how he received the sea as his divine domain, and invented horses out of sea foam and fury. All of this is conveyed through exaggerated hand gestures, neighing, and what might be competitive prancing. You sit cross-legged near the back of the crowd, clutching a cup of date wine and questioning your life choices. Still, there's something charming about it. Ridiculous, yes, but deeply Roman. Here's today's historical fact. Neptune, or Neptunus, wasn't always the towering, trident-brandishing sea god we picture today. Early on, he was more of a freshwater deity, springs, rivers, irrigation. It wasn't until the Romans encountered the Greek god Poseidon that Neptune absorbed all those crashing waves, monstrous tempests, and seahorse-drawn chariots. Even then, he never quite reached Poseidon's popularity. Some temples to Neptune were built only as afterthoughts, especially inland. But the Romans being Romans, They eventually gave him festivals, priests, rituals, and now, apparently, amateur theater. The bonfire dance ends in a final, dramatic leap. One performer, in a shaggy mane and poorly attached tail, hurls himself into the sand yelling, "Behold the horse river!" Everyone claps. No one knows what it means. Gaius steps forward next, scroll in hand, and delivers a lecture. You brace yourself. Neptune, he begins, has long presented himself as the god of power, motion, and mystery. But did you know? He once lost a naming contest? The crowd gasps in mock shock. Yes. Gaius points a dramatic finger skyward. When competing with Minerva to be patron of Athens, Neptune struck the earth with his trident and produced a salty spring. Minerva, however, gifted the olive tree, and the people, they chose her. He paces, feeding on the audience's energy like an amphitheater gladiator. So let us remember, Neptune is not invincible. He has known rejection, he has known humiliation, and Rome shall remind him of it. He holds up a clay amphora painted with a crude stick figure, Poseidon being booed by Greek citizens. The crowd roars. Somewhere, a musician plays a single triumphant note on a lyre and then immediately breaks a string. That's today's strange detail. Gaius has begun commissioning satirical art mocking Neptune. Tiles, pottery, even graffiti that shows the sea god slipping on a fish. One tavern wall now sports a fresco of Neptune with a seagull on his head and the words "wet tyrant" underneath. It's part of a broader campaign Gaius is calling divine demystification. The goal? Undermine Neptune's celestial authority by showing he's just another myth with a bad attitude and bad fashion. And historians? Oh, they're still arguing. Some claim this campaign was a forerunner of Rome's later push toward demythologizing old deities in favor of imperial cults, worshipping emperors, not unpredictable gods. Others say Gaius was simply trying to drown his political missteps in spectacle. You stroll through the forum the next day and notice a stall selling tiny Neptune dolls. They come with little frowny faces and removable tridents. One merchant demonstrates how to snap off the arms for dramatic effect. "Buy 3, get a free dolphin whistle," he says brightly. But despite the mockery, you can feel the tension building. Gaius, for all his theatrics, is looking more frayed. His eyes dart toward the Tiber whenever the wind changes. He's stopped bathing in public baths. Too risky, he says, and drinks only rainwater now. You find him muttering to himself about invisible sabotage and treacherous fogs. He's gone from blustering to brooding, and the Senate is growing uneasy. They begin holding closed-door meetings. Some question whether the Neptune campaign is harming Rome's image. Others wonder if the gods, real or not, might be getting annoyed. You catch a snippet of one senator muttering, "What if we provoke a, seaquake?" Another replies, "We're overdue for one. If it happens, we'll say it's Jupiter sneezing." Crisis management, Roman edition. The religious authorities are caught in the middle. The pontifices, Rome's high priests, are divided. Some support Gaius out of tradition. Others refuse to take sides, mumbling, "We'd rather not antagonize hydrodynamic deities this week. Thanks." Meanwhile, Neptune still doesn't respond. No tidal wave, no voice in the foam. Just the same rolling surf, the same whispering waves that pay no mind to human tantrums. You sit on the harbor wall at sunset, watching ships bob gently in place. The sea reflects 1,000 gold coins of fading sunlight. And that's the thing, isn't it? Rome is roaring, And Neptune is just quiet. It's almost worse than fury. The silence, the indifference. Gaius wanted a duel, a divine argument, something, anything, to prove he mattered to the gods. Instead, he's shouting into the surf, and the surf has no mouth. You close your eyes as the breeze brushes past, gentle and salt-heavy. A child laughs nearby, throwing pebbles. A dog barks once, then settles. A fisherman ties his boat for the night and hums something old and off-key, and you begin to wonder, maybe Neptune did answer, just not in a way Rome could hear. It's early morning, and the Senate chamber smells faintly of nervous sweat and slightly burnt barley cakes. You're perched on a bench in the back, trying to stay out of the way, as today's agenda begins with the most unusual item, a hearing on Neptune's historical pattern of offenses. Yes, this is where we are now. Rome is formally reviewing the sea god's rap sheet. Gaius Cassius Figulus stands at the rostrum with a pile of scrolls beside him, each one filled with tales, complaints, and suspiciously ocean-adjacent mishaps. His tunic is rumpled. His eyes have that wild gleam of a man who hasn't slept and thinks everything is evidence. He clears his throat dramatically. Honored senators, citizens of Rome, and any underwater spies present today. The room does not laugh. He presses on. Let the record reflect that this is not Neptune's first act of hostility. No. The god of the sea has long waged a quiet, soggy war against our republic. He unrolls a scroll with theatrical flair. In 198 BC, during a routine grain shipment from Sicily, a sudden whirlpool swallowed 3 ships. Coincidence? I think not. He slams the scroll onto the marble. 30 years later, a Roman fisherman claims he saw a dolphin with glowing red eyes circling his boat. The man never fished again. Who do we think controls the dolphins? You glance sideways at a younger senator, scribbling dolphin mind control into his notes with surprising seriousness. Gaius continues, scroll after scroll. Stories of floods ruining fields, mysterious disappearances of harborside goats, and a deeply unfortunate incident where a senator's bathhouse was invaded by aggressive sea breezes. The chamber remains mostly silent. There's a lot of uneasy eye contact, and then someone else rises. Senator Terentia, a sharp-eyed woman who speaks slowly and precisely. With respect, Gaius, she says, are we truly suggesting that every splash, breeze, and missing fish in Roman history is part of some grand aquatic conspiracy? Gaius blinks. Yes, she nods, pauses, then adds, well, carry on. You can't help but grin. But here's your authoritative historical fact. Romans were known for archiving grievances. They recorded omens, disasters, dreams, even strange animal sightings. The Annales Maximi, a sort of sacred Roman yearbook, listed not only major wars and elections, but also things like milk rained from the sky, or a cow spoke in Etruscan. So, creating a Neptune offense list wasn't completely out of character. Still, today's strange detail? Gaius has hired a town crier whose only job is to recite Neptune's alleged offenses from street corners at noon. You overhear him near the market. On this day, in 171 BC, a seagull defecated on a senator's toga, possibly divine sabotage. The crowd throws coins. Whether they're entertained or just trying to get him to stop, you're not sure. Later that day, you walk along the docks, where an old sailor tells you tales of the sea's revenge. He claims Neptune never forgets, that storms have memory, that certain winds are named after men who dared mock the sea. You ask him what happened to those men. He smiles a little too long. They don't get statues. And that's the thing. For all Rome's confidence, its laws, its legions, its marble, everything, there's a growing current of unease. The war on Neptune has gone on for weeks now. There's no resolution, no response. Just more wind, more ritual, more weirdness. One night, you're invited to a private gathering of senators. It's more of a wine-drinking session with philosophy. They're tired. Gaius's crusade has pulled resources away from actual issues, like grain shortages, plumbing problems, and the fact that someone keeps stealing public benches. You listen as they debate softly. Maybe he's not angry, one mutters. Maybe he just doesn't care. Or maybe, another says, swirling her cup, we've made him care. They all fall quiet. Historians are still debating whether this entire war on Neptune was Rome's way of processing grief. After all, they had lost a fleet. Men had died. And Rome, proud Rome, had no one to blame, except the sea. Blaming Neptune was easier than facing uncertainty, easier than admitting that nature doesn't take orders, even in Latin. And Rome? Rome didn't like loose ends. The Senate eventually passes a decree. A formal list of divine suspicion incidents will be compiled monthly. You skim the first edition. It includes sudden fog during games, weird-tasting well water, and general unease felt by goats near the coast. Your favorite entry, Citizen Gaius Minor, reports that a crab stared at him for 7 seconds without blinking. Suspicious. That night, as you lay in your cot, lulled by the distant sounds of waves, you begin to wonder, what does it mean when humans try to put gods on trial? When they treat the ocean like a political opponent? Maybe it's brave. Maybe it's delusional. Maybe it's just Rome, always performing, always believing it can command the wind. And maybe, just maybe, that belief is what made Rome so unstoppable. Not the legions, not the laws, but the sheer audacity to declare war on the sea and expect to win. There's something deeply unsettling about watching a goat on trial. You're sitting in the dusty amphitheater just outside Rome, the sun pounding your shoulders, when the herald steps forward and announces with as much seriousness as he can muster, the people versus this goat. The goat bleats. Gaius Cassius Figulus strides forward, like he's Cicero reborn, his arms sweeping dramatically toward the defendant. This creature, he proclaims, has been selected as the earthly vessel of Neptune's will. It shall answer for his crimes. You rub your temples. It's too early for this. But yes, this is happening. The war against Neptune has now reached the scapegoating phase, literally. Here's your historical fact of the day. Romans did practice ritual scapegoating. The term scapegoat even traces its roots to ancient sacrificial practices, where an animal, or sometimes, disturbingly, a human proxy, would symbolically carry away the sins or curses of a city or people. The ritual was meant to appease angry gods, restore cosmic balance, and most importantly, give people something to throw stuff at. This poor goat, he's got a laurel wreath around one horn and an expression that says, I didn't ask for any of this. Gaius continues pacing. This beast shall carry Rome's grievances into the depths, that Neptune may taste our fury and know our resolve. One senator whispers, should we at least name it? Another replies, you don't name a war goat. A priest steps forward to conduct the proper rites. He anoints the goat with oils, murmurs in Latin, and then has the goat stare into a polished bowl of seawater. Any movement, he says gravely, will be taken as an admission of guilt. The goat promptly sneezes. Gaius gasps. You see, at this point, even the crowd is unsure whether they're watching a ritual, a comedy, or some sort of philosophical performance art. But the verdict is reached. Guilty. The punishment, a ceremonial march to the sea, followed by the goat's symbolic return to Neptune. You trail behind the procession, wondering if anyone involved has ever read a book about marine biology. Down at the shore, the soldiers tie a tiny scroll to the goat's neck. The scroll, you're told, lists every offense Rome has attributed to Neptune in the past 3 decades, including unauthorized tide surges and excessive humidity during the Vestalia festival. And then, as the sun dips lower, they lead the goat onto a makeshift raft. You watch, wide-eyed, as they push it out into the waves. A collective hush falls. For a brief, surreal moment, the goat floats, blinking toward Rome, like it's reconsidering its life choices. Then the raft tips. The goat splashes in. Everyone gasps. The priest raises both hands. The offering has been accepted. The crowd cheers. The goat swims calmly back to shore. A soldier tries to pretend it didn't happen and pushes it out again. This time, it paddles in a wide, slow circle, absolutely refusing to be a divine courier. Eventually, a junior augur steps forward and declares that the goat's return signifies Neptune's desire for dialogue. You stifle a laugh as Gaius mutters, "Or sabotage." Here's your strange detail. After the failed sacrifice, Gaius reportedly begins keeping a list of suspiciously buoyant animals. Back in Rome, word spreads. Some take the goat's return as a blessing. Others see it as a curse. One poet writes, "Even the beasts reject the tides, and the tides laugh in reply." It's performed in the Forum the next day and receives confused applause. Meanwhile, the Senate is divided. Some want to escalate, others are embarrassed. "Declare war on the goats next," someone jokes. "Let's not leave any barnyard stone unturned." But Gaius? Gaius is doubling down. He demands more rituals, more ceremonies, more accusations. He proposes burning salt in the temple of Janus to dry out the sea's spirit. He calls for a statue of Neptune to be blindfolded and put on trial. And historians are still debating whether this phase marked the beginning of Gaius's political decline or his transformation into a kind of tragic Roman myth himself. You see him pacing more these days, muttering about signs, waves that crash at the wrong angle, seaweed found too far inland. One evening, you catch him staring into a fountain, whispering, "We'll get through to you one day." You don't say anything, just stand beside him, listening to the water splash gently into the basin. The city hums behind you. Bells ring, wine spills. Children chase each other through the dust. But out here, near the edge of all things, Rome still believes it can win an argument with the universe. Because that's what this war has become, hasn't it? A declaration of relevance. A defiance of silence. Rome shouts at the sea, not because it expects an answer, but because not shouting feels like surrender. And as ridiculous as it all is, you kind of get it. So tonight, as the stars blink into place, and the goat, yes, the same one, nibbles on someone's discarded sandal by the docks, you close your eyes and smile. Because, in its stubborn, absurd way, Rome is still Rome. The coastal wind today smells like seaweed and civic overreach. You're walking along a newly paved path beside the harbor, a path that leads directly to Rome's latest architectural masterpiece, the Temple of Counter-Insult. Yes, that's its working name. And yes, it was built specifically to offend Neptune, commissioned by Gaius Cassius Figelus and funded with what we'll generously call discretionary religious allocations. The temple is Rome's first official spite shrine. The entire structure is meant to mock Neptune in ways so subtle and esoteric, they practically require a priestly tour guide. You stand at the entrance beside a merchant hawking tiny clay replicas of the building, 2 for 1 if you hate water, as a small crowd gathers to witness the grand opening. The temple is damp, on purpose. The stones have been chosen for their tendency to weep salt deposits, creating the illusion that the walls are always crying. This symbolizes Neptune's eternal shame, Gaius announces proudly. Inside, the statue at the altar is not of Neptune, but a massive marble fish, upside down. Behind it is an inscription in Latin that reads, "Sic transit gloria aquae." Thus passes the glory of water. Someone in the back coughs. A bit much, don't you think? Here's your authoritative historical fact. Romans sometimes built rival temples or modified shrines to reflect political and religious messages. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were statements of dominance, propaganda in stone. There were even instances where entire temples were rededicated from one god to another when favor or public opinion shifted. And today's strange detail? This temple has no roof. According to Gaius, that's intentional. It denies Neptune the satisfaction of pouring rain inside. A gust of wind immediately flips his hood backward. He looks up and snarls, "Nice try." The opening ceremony is predictably dramatic. Priests in wet robes swing incense made from dried seaweed and olive ash. They chant a list of Neptune's failures, including the cowardly retreat of the tide and failing to wash away a minor rebellion in Sardinia. A choir of schoolchildren performs an original hymn titled "The Sea is Just a Large Puddle." Afterward, the crowd wanders through the damp corridors. You overhear one visitor mutter, "Is it just me, or does this smell like mold and vengeance?" Back in the city, the temple is causing ripples, pun intended. Traditionalists are scandalized. Fishermen are furious. "You don't antagonize the sea," one old man hisses while selling smoked eels. "You flirt with it. You bribe it with breadcrumbs. You don't build insult shrines." Others, however, are delighted. "There's finally a place to go when you're mad at the rain," a shopkeeper says. "I yelled at a wall for 20 minutes. Felt amazing." You pass a bulletin board with scribbled complaints pinned beneath the heading, "Messages to the Sea." Some read, "Neptune, my laundry got soaked again. Bring back my sandal, you thief." This is about the shrimp. You know what you did. Historians are still debating whether this structure was truly meant to antagonize a god, or whether it was a political tool, a way for Gaius to channel national frustration into something tangible. But either way, it worked. The public is obsessed. Soon, spite temples start popping up like mushrooms after a storm. One merchant opens a shack called the Anti-Flood Hut. It's just a roof held up by poles, with "Down with Moisture" carved into the beams. Another group proposes a museum of failed tides, featuring barrels of water that didn't reach their expected marks. And yet, you can feel it. The sea is watching. Or maybe it's just your imagination, but there's something in the air. The gulls are quieter. The waves crash a little harder against the rocks. A statue near the docks, once bright, now weeps rust down its side. One night, you walk the temple alone. Gaius is there too, sitting beneath the weeping walls, muttering to himself. They don't see it, he whispers. They think this is about jokes, about fish, about goat trials, but it's deeper. You sit beside him, Neptune. He doesn't answer because he doesn't need to. He just is. And that terrifies them. You nod. You understand. The rituals, the jokes, the shrines, they're Rome's way of grasping at control. A city that conquered continents, reduced kings to clients, and tamed rivers with aqueducts, cannot accept that some things remain untouched. Wild, indifferent. The ocean doesn't rise to arguments. It rises on its own time. Still, the next morning, Gaius unveils the temple's final edition, a large bronze mirror facing the sea. So he can see himself, he explains. A child nearby tilts his head and says, "But the sea has no face." And maybe that's exactly the point. You're sitting under a faded awning outside the Library of Marius, nursing a fig pastry and listening to the mutterings of three historians who look like they've been arguing since the Republic was founded. They're knee-deep in scrolls, charts, and a hastily drawn sketch of what appears to be Neptune with a unibrow. One of them taps the table impatiently. "I'm telling you," she says, jabbing her stylus at the parchment, "this whole war is either a sophisticated satire of Roman ritual excess, or Gaius Cassius Figulus has absolutely lost his mind." Another historian, older and wobblier, peers over his reading lenses. "You underestimate the political theater of late Republic Rome. A declaration of war against a god is just the next step in an increasingly desperate spiral for relevance." The third scribbles something and mumbles, "I think it's about his mother." You finish your pastry and lean in a little, because the truth is, no one agrees. Historians are still debating the point. Was this whole thing a calculated farce, designed to mock bureaucracy, distract the masses, or vent civic anxiety? Or was it deadly earnest, a genuine attempt to control the uncontrollable through ritual, law, and dramatic goat throwing? You're starting to think it's both. Back at the Forum, Gaius Cassius Figulus is preparing for what he calls the Reckoning Review. It's not a Senate hearing. It's not a religious rite. It's something else. You've learned not to ask. It involves 12 scribes, 6 astrologers, 3 augurs, and 1 man who claims he can taste metaphysical tension in olives. He brought a jar. You politely declined. They've gathered to analyze every ritual, every spear toss, every goat sneeze since the war began, in hopes of identifying the turning point. The consensus? No one has any idea what's happening anymore. Here's your historical fact for today. Roman augury wasn't just about watching birds. It was about signs, omens. The state consulted specialists before major decisions. Should we go to war, cross a river, build a temple? If the signs were bad, even victorious generals could be denied a triumph. So this review of Neptune-related outcomes isn't totally absurd by Roman standards. What makes it stand out is the volume. There are so many signs now. One augur claims he saw 2 doves flying in opposite directions, clear evidence of divine indecision. Another points to a recent jellyfish washing ashore, with a pattern vaguely resembling a frown. And then there's the dream scroll. Gaius reads it aloud to the assembly. Last night, I dreamed I was swallowed by a fish made of marble. Inside, there were scrolls. The scrolls were blank. I take this as a warning. One senator suggests it might just mean he should cut back on olives before bed. But it's not just Gaius anymore. The city is obsessed. You overhear two market vendors arguing about whether the wind that blew over a crate of cabbages was a sign of Neptune's displeasure, or just a gust. There's a new column in the daily tablet called Sea Watch, listing daily wave patterns and suspicious puddle behavior. And at the Temple of Vesta, one priestess refuses to wash her hands anymore, claiming Neptune might be sneaking in through the plumbing. Today's strange detail. A bakery near the docks has started making Neptune loaves. Bread shaped like angry waves, with olive eyes and a frown. They're selling very well, but under the surface something's shifting. The jokes are quieter now. The ceremony's less crowded. The once constant laughter has grown tentative, like everyone's still performing, but with one eye on the horizon. You visit the seaside temple again. The roofless one. The spite shrine. It's oddly empty today. Only Gaius remains, kneeling before the altar, whispering to the waves. He's watching, he mutters. I can feel it. You sit beside him. The sky is cloudy, the tide unusually high. Gaius doesn't speak for a while. Then, softly, do you think we've offended him? You pause. I think he was never listening. Gaius nods slowly, as if that hurts more than divine wrath. Because what if this war, this months-long opera of scrolls, goats, and soggy parades, was never met with resistance, never even noticed? What if the gods don't care? That's the worst outcome, isn't it? Because if they care, you matter. You're part of the cosmos. But if they don't, well, then Rome has been yelling into the void. And Rome does not like being ignored. You walk home as thunder rolls in the distance. Not loud, not dramatic, just a low, tired rumble. The wind shifts, and in that moment, you realize something. The war might be winding down, but the story is far from over. It's the middle of the night, and you're standing barefoot on a cold stone pier, watching a Roman senator scream at the sea. There's no crowd this time, no drums, no trumpets, just Gaius Cassius Figulus in a damp tunic, hair wild, face red, howling into the darkness. Answer me, you cowardly puddle. The only reply is the soft slap of waves against the dock. You cross your arms against the breeze, a mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment curling in your gut. The once proud orator, the man who once dazzled the Senate with a fully choreographed interpretive trial for a goat, is now reduced to this, ranting at Neptune in the dead of night, with nothing but a seagull for company, and the seagull left 10 minutes ago. For weeks now, Gaius has been returning to the same spot, alone. No entourage, no scribes, just him and the sea. He's taken to calling the water names, not creative ones, mostly you soggy fraud and slosh emperor. Sometimes he just growls. Here's your historical fact for tonight. During times of war and upheaval, some Roman leaders were known to retreat into obsession or mysticism. General Scipio Africanus allegedly communicated with gods in his dreams. The Emperor Caligula once reportedly built a bridge of boats across the Bay of Baiae just to defy a prophecy. And of course, there's Gaius, who's now on a first-name basis with every tide. It's no longer about the storm that started it all. That storm is long gone. This is personal. Tonight's strange detail Gaius brought a scroll labeled Formal Summons for Divine Negotiation, tied it to a waterproof urn, and threw it into the sea with a note that read, "Please respond in 3 to 5 business days." You can't make this stuff up, and yet, despite the absurdity, there's something tragic here. A man who believed that if he followed the rituals, threw the right spear, drowned the right goat, mocked the right statue, he could force the universe to explain itself. Instead, the universe sent him waves, indifferent, rhythmic, and mute. The Senate no longer supports him. His war budget has dried up. The Temple of Counter-Insult now serves as an informal bathhouse for nearby fishermen. Even the anti-Neptune pastries have stopped selling. People say they go stale too quickly. Or perhaps the novelty just wore off. Historians are still debating whether this final stage in the war represents a symbolic defeat or a spiritual unraveling. Some suggest Gaius knew all along that Neptune would never answer, but waged the war anyway, to give Rome something solid to fight when everything else fell to drift. And others, more charitable perhaps, think Gaius genuinely wanted justice, that he truly believed the gods should be accountable, just like men, that maybe, in a weird, desperate way, he was ahead of his time. You walk up beside him on the dock. He's quiet now, just staring into the dark surf. "I threatened to exile his trident," he mutters. You nod. He didn't even send a wave back. You offer him a small pouch of olives. He declines. "They say the sea always wins," he says. You think for a moment, only because it doesn't quit. Gaius chuckles once, dry and thin. "Perhaps I should have picked a smaller god. Maybe the god of dew. I think he's busy watering grass." He snorts. That's the first laugh you've heard from him in weeks. You sit together, the night still, except for the quiet huff of water and the occasional distant bark of a dock dog on patrol. Eventually, Gaius reaches into his cloak and pulls out a tiny bronze figure. Neptune, probably, or a fish, or a very muscular squid. He tosses it into the sea with a soft plop. "For what it's worth," he whispers, "I surrender." You say nothing. The sea, predictably, doesn't either, but the wind changes slightly. Warm now, curling around your shoulders like a well-worn blanket. Gaius closes his eyes. You do too. Maybe that's all he ever really wanted. Not a victory, not vengeance, just a reply. You leave him there as the sky lightens. Not quite morning, not quite night. A liminal space, a place between things. Like Rome, like Gaius, like this strange, soggy war. And as you walk back toward the city, the waves behind you keep rolling in, soft and steady, completely unbothered. Rome is quiet, not silent. The city never really is, but quieter than it's been in weeks. No new declarations, no war chants, no spear-throwing ceremonies or spiteful statues being unveiled at public expense. Just the normal clamor of carts, sandals, and the gentle groaning of a baker trying to roll out dough with a crooked pin. You lean against a column outside the Senate and watch the pigeons, who seem both relieved and mildly disappointed that their services are no longer required for aquatic reconnaissance. Inside, the Senate is voting on something utterly mundane. A grain transport route adjustment. No mention of gods. No mention of goats. Gaius Cassius Figulus is noticeably absent. And just like that, you realize the war on Neptune is over. Not declared over. Not officially wrapped up in some dramatic treaty sealed with salt and drama. Just forgotten. The momentum has faded. The scrolls have stopped. The city has found new distractions, new wars, New scandals. New vendors selling blessed sandals with extra arch support. Life has gone on. That's how these things end in Rome, isn't it? Not with a bang, but with paperwork and the next shiny object. Here's your historical fact of the day. Roman political attention spans were short when it suited them. Huge movements, sacred laws, or grand decrees could vanish from conversation in a week, especially if they became too embarrassing or inconvenient. Historians even note how some records seem to have been intentionally misplaced when they no longer served political needs. And Neptune? He's become a punchline. You overhear two bakers arguing over whose oven is hotter. One says, "Careful, or Neptune will steam your flour again." They laugh. The war has been reduced to a kitchen joke. A few public murals still remain. Weathered images of Gaius shouting at the sea, or a goat heroically surfing a wave. Someone scribbled, "Still waiting for reply," underneath one of them. Today's strange detail? One artist has started selling small clay figurines of retired Gaius, complete with tiny toga, tiny frown, and a scroll labeled "Unsent Letters to Neptune." They're a hit with tourists. You stop by the old temple of counter-insult. It's still standing, barely. The fish statue is missing an eye, and someone has hung laundry across the altar. A stray cat naps inside, curled where a priest once chanted curses at waves. The marble mirror still faces the sea, now streaked with bird droppings and time. A child throws a pebble into the surf. It makes a soft plop. No one reacts. Back in the Senate, the talk turns to military supply chains and taxation reform. Someone makes a half-hearted joke about asking Neptune to balance the budget, and everyone groans. No one has the energy to relive the whole thing. You pass Gaius's villa later that afternoon. The front gate is cracked open. No soldiers. No frantic aides. Just a gardener, quietly trimming back an overgrown laurel bush that had started creeping into the road like it wanted attention. You hesitate, then step through. The courtyard is the same. Quiet, sun-drenched, a little overgrown. A dry fountain sits in the middle, once adorned with shells. The shells are gone now, the water long evaporated. Gaius is reclining in a chair under a fig tree, wearing simpler clothes now. No crimson-bordered toga, no dramatic pins. He's peeling an apple with a short, dull knife, letting the skin drop in a lazy spiral to the ground. He sees you and gives a nod. "No more war," he says. You nod back. "No more sea." He gestures to the empty fountain. "I even got rid of my fish." You sit beside him. For a while, neither of you says anything. Eventually, he sighs. "Do you think I was mad?" You shrug. "I think you were Roman." He chuckles. "That's worse." Then, quieter, "I just wanted something to answer back. After the storm, after the losses, I wanted the sea to look me in the eye and explain." He pauses. "But it doesn't have eyes." You both stare at the fig tree, where a squirrel is having the time of its life with one of Gaius's pears. "Do you miss it?" you ask. He doesn't answer for a while. "I miss believing it mattered." That hits harder than you expect. Historians are still debating whether the whole affair was political performance or spiritual unraveling. But sitting here, with Gaius and the ghosts of salt and speeches, you think it was something simpler. It was grief, channeled through law, wrapped in ritual, dressed up as vengeance, and like all grief, it burned bright, then quietly faded. You leave Gaius in his chair, still peeling fruit, still mumbling occasionally at birds. The wind rustles the fig leaves. Somewhere far off, a wave crashes, soft, indifferent. And Rome? Rome carries on. It always does. A few years have passed, and you're traveling now, beyond the walls of Rome, down dusty roads lined with olive trees, through villages where the gossip is rich and the bread is richer. You've heard whispers of Gaius Cassius Figulus, retired and restless, now living in a countryside villa with a pond he allegedly glares at daily. Naturally, you need to see this for yourself. You arrive just past noon. His estate is modest by senatorial standards. No golden columns or frescoed ceilings. Just a sprawling orchard, a few servants, and a stone bench that looks like it's been sighed upon for decades. You find Gaius sitting near a small pond. It's not a glamorous body of water, more of a muddy, sleepy puddle than anything you'd name. A couple of frogs chirp lazily in the reeds. A dragonfly does a low sweep over the surface, like it's late for something. Gaius doesn't say anything as you approach. He just gestures for you to sit beside him, handing you a small, sun-warmed fig without looking. And then he glares at the pond. Just like they said, a full 30 seconds pass before he speaks. It moved. You look. It has not. You chew your fig in silence. I've named it Mini Neptune, he finally says. It's treacherous. It stole my reed pen last week, sucked it right in. You're about to ask if he's serious, but no, of course he is. This is the man who once tried to declare a formal divine truce via sponge message delivered by duck. He's calmer now, slower, but still, Gaius. He explains his days in the country, tending the vineyard, occasionally writing letters to the Senate, none of which he sends, and watching the pond for signs of treachery. You never know, he says, when it might bubble. Here's your historical fact. Roman senators often retired to countryside villas in their later years. It was considered the ideal way to wind down, a life of odium or leisure, dedicated to philosophy, farming, and reflecting on one's public service. But for men like Gaius, whose identity was so entangled with Rome's rituals and battles, even the imaginary ones, odium can feel like exile. Today's strange detail: Gaius keeps a stone statue of a goat next to the pond. Symbolic, he says, a reminder that even a goat can survive war if it's determined enough. The statue is wearing a tiny helmet. The conversation drifts. He asks about Rome, the Senate, whether anyone's declared war on Neptune in his absence. You tell him no. He seems disappointed. Sometimes, he murmurs, I wonder if I dreamed the whole thing. The scrolls, the altar, the spite temple, the goat trial. You nudge him. You threw a spear into a wine bucket. He smiles. Ah yes, the first battle. He picks up a small stone and tosses it into the pond. It skips once, then disappears. Did I lose? He asks suddenly. You glance at him. His tone is light, but there's weight beneath it. You think about it. Hard to say. You made people laugh. You gave them a villain. You gave them a way to yell at the sea without drowning. He nods slowly. You weren't trying to beat Neptune, you add. You were trying to explain him. Another stone. This one sinks immediately. I still think I should have tried a net, he mutters. The sun is beginning to lower. The air soft and golden. A servant brings a plate of olives and bread. Gaius takes one, eats it thoughtfully, and then throws the pit at the pond with impressive accuracy. Historians are still debating whether Gaius's war was a failure or a philosophical breakthrough. But here, watching him throw stones and shade at a pond, You get the feeling he doesn't care anymore, or rather, he's made peace with not knowing. Rome has moved on. There are new heroes, new wars, new ridiculous rumors. Neptune is back to being just a statue in a neglected temple, a name mumbled in sailors' prayers. But here, in this quiet corner of the countryside, a retired senator keeps the memory alive, half out of habit, half out of stubbornness, and maybe just a little out of love. Because, let's face it, no one has ever cared about being ignored. Quite like Gaius Cassius Figulus, as you leave, he stands and walks you to the gate, one hand resting gently on your shoulder. "Tell Rome," he says, "I'm still watching the water." You promise you will, but you both know Rome probably stopped listening a long time ago. You've returned to the coast. Years have passed since the war on Neptune fizzled into myth and market banter. The docks are busier now, traders unloading spices, fishermen singing off-key, and the occasional goat trying to chew through someone's sandal strap. You walk past familiar places. The spot where Gaius declared the first accusation. The beach where the goat raft drifted out and promptly drifted back. And the ruins of the spiteful temple of counter-insult. Now, a snack stall that sells salted eel on sticks. But it's not nostalgia that brought you back. It's another storm. Not one of scrolls or ceremony, but a real one. Last night, a fleet went down. 3 ships, lost just beyond the horizon. And the people, they're whispering again. You hear it in the murmurs over barrels of olives and behind market stalls. Maybe he's still angry. Maybe we shouldn't have built that upside-down fish. Did anyone ever apologize? Rome doesn't like patterns. Rome likes reasons. And when the sea takes without explanation, the old story wakes up again, like a wave that never stopped rolling. You walk along the sand where driftwood and soggy crates have begun to wash ashore. Someone's tied a little offering to a piece of coral, fig leaves, garlic, a scrap of purple cloth. The tide nudges it gently, unimpressed. Here's your final historical fact. Rome never fully separated religion from daily life. Even in its most pragmatic periods, the belief that divine forces influenced everything, from crops to coin flips, was deeply ingrained. When tragedy struck, they reached not just for logic, but for ritual, for story. And this story, well, it's come back around. You spot a group of senators at the shore, deep in discussion. Someone gestures toward the sea. Another scratches notes onto a tablet. One of them sighs loudly and says, "We're not doing this again." Another murmurs, "Just maybe a small offering." Quiet, no goats this time. You smile, but then something catches your eye. A child, a boy, maybe 10, standing ankle deep in the surf, holding a handmade boat carved from olive wood. He presses something into it, a tiny clay figure. Neptune, perhaps, or Gaius, or both. He pushes the boat into the waves and whispers something. You can't hear it, but the moment is unmistakable. It's not a declaration of war. It's a whisper into the wind, a gentle message to whatever waits beyond the foam. The boat drifts, floats, and then, just before it disappears into the horizon, a breeze shifts. The tide rolls back in, and with it, the boat, undamaged, upright, returned. The child blinks, unsure whether that's good or bad. You kneel beside him. "Sometimes," you say softly, "the sea gives back." "Is it angry?" he asks. You think about Gaius, about the goat, about the silence. "I don't think it gets angry," you reply. "It just is." The boy nods, picks up the boat again. "I'll try a different one tomorrow." You pat his shoulder. That's Rome. That's all of us, really. Keep sending little boats into the unknown, hoping something answers. Historians are still debating whether Neptune's silence was indifference or wisdom. But tonight, as the moon climbs over the water and the tide slides in like a slow breath, the old myth softens into memory. The sea remains, it always does, and the story, like the waves, keeps coming back. You're lying down now, breathing slowly, letting your body sink deeper into stillness with every soft breath in, every long breath out. The war is over, not just the strange, soggy campaign against a silent sea god, but the clamor in your mind, the swirl of thoughts and expectations that kept tugging at you. Now, like Rome, they've grown quiet. Like Gaius, they've settled into the background, less urgent, less sharp, just passing waves. Think back for a moment. You walked the streets of ancient Rome, watched as a senator shook his fist at the horizon, declared war on Neptune, and built temples made of spite and salt. You stood beside a goat on trial, laughed at tiny boats, smirking scrolls, and statues that always seemed one rainstorm away from crumbling. You watched the absurd become ritual, and the ritual become reflection. And in the end, the waves just kept rolling. You might feel a little lighter now, floating gently, like one of those tiny olive wood boats drifting out to sea. There's no need for answers anymore. No need to win or be right or shake the gods until they answer back. Just rest. Just let it be. The sea isn't angry. It's just the sea. And you're just you. You're allowed to sleep now. You're allowed to rest. The waves will keep moving without you.